Copernicus's heliocentric model, Newton's laws of motion, Darwin's theory of evolution. It's tempting to view science in terms of discoveries. It delivers not only a compelling story of inspirational geniuses and heroes, but also a linear progression of history, separated by the bubble of science. Yet, when we attempt to learn more about a specific moment in history, the introduction of multiple seemingly unrelated concepts is unavoidable. When we introduce contingencies, this model becomes muddled. One discovery lies not only in a chain of other discoveries, but also in a cluttered network of diverse people, ideas, and institutions. So powerful and expansive is this network that its components, even when separated by thousands of miles of distance and years of time, are still connected. It's convenient to view science as isolated or occurring in a straightforward progression, but history demonstrates that it is a network rich in collaboration and contingencies. Discoveries are not only the product of scientists' own observation and ideas, but also a synthesis of different scientific questions, observations, and development, as well as non-scientific circumstances and influences. Science relies not only on the current observation and the ideas of individual scientists, but also heavily on collaboration, including contributions from past scientists. Copernicus's development of the heliocentric model in his book On the Revolutions of Heavenly Spheres was a breakthrough in astronomical history, breaking away from more than a millennium of precedent on planetary models and motion and beginning the scientific revolution. The geocentric model, created by Claudius Ptolemy, an astronomer who followed the Greek philosopher Aristotle's framework, placed the Earth at the center of the universe and argued that the Sun and the other planets orbited the Earth in uniform circular motion. Ptolemy's observations were incongruent with this framework, as they showed that the planets seemed to move at different speeds along their orbits. He also noticed that the planets wobbled as they orbited Earth. Therefore, in order to harmonize his observation with Aristotle's framework, Ptolemy introduced three new concepts: the eccentric, the point offset from the Earth which the planets orbited; the epicycle, in which the planets orbited around a point that would orbit the Earth, forming a double orbit; and the equant, another offset point which made uniform circular motion possible. However, Copernicus was not the first to criticize Ptolemy's model, nor did he create his own without reading and incorporating the work of past scientists. As a student, Copernicus read the Epitome of the Almagest, which incorporated the work of Ali Qoshchi, a Persian astronomer who argued that the epicycle and the equant were unnecessary and that planetary motion could be modeled using only the eccentric as the point around which all other planets orbited. There also already existed great disagreement over Ptolemy's convoluted model of Aristotle's framework, which began with Muslim astronomers such as Ibn al-Haytham, who believed that it had corrupted its source by introducing new points. While Copernicus was the one to devise a model that concluded that the Sun was the center of the solar system, he ultimately relied, directly and indirectly, on the work of astronomers separated by both time and space, whose contributions culminated in the development of his theory. Copernicus also incorporated the Tusi couple to create his heliocentric model, which allowed him to maintain the idea that the planets moved in perfect circular motion without the need for Ptolemy's equant and epicycles. While Copernicus did not cite his creator, the Persian astronomer Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, in his work, and the model of uniform planetary motion would eventually be disproven, Copernicus's reliance on previous astronomers was necessary to formulate his model, which would be expanded upon. Therefore, the scientific revolution, which historians mark at the beginning of the publication of Copernicus's book, was not a discovery that was the product of an astronomer operating alone, but depended on the contributions and development of past understanding. Science also relies on institutions to make its discoveries possible, rather than occurring in an isolated bubble. Given their scientific nature, Newton's gravity and laws of motion are seemingly abstract and appear isolated from the outside world. Newton's laws seem even more disconnected given his solitary nature, reportedly spending much of his time alone in isolation on his work and studies, and never having left England. However, it was the rise of what would become the British colonial empire that enabled Newton to access the diverse array of observations and data he incorporated into his work, Principia Mathematica, which expanded human understanding through the laws of motion and gravity. Newton corresponded with and relied on the observations of merchants and explorers aboard slave ships. He also relied on tidal wave observations from officers working for the East India Company, which had reached a global scale through the expansion of British colonialism. Newton also benefited from British colonies in the Americas, as he was able to record the observation of comets from slave owners living in Maryland. Finally, Newton was influenced by the works of Jean Richer, a French astronomer whose experiments on pendulums were carried out at colonial outposts, and whose observations allowed Newton to conclude that gravity varied across Earth's surface, which had caused pendulums to move at different speeds. Therefore, while Newton's work is purely scientific, it relies on and incorporates data collected from non-scientific sources. Without the rise of global colonial empires, Newton would not have access to the information and numerical data that support his theories and calculations. Science, therefore, does not occur in isolated fields, but is heavily reliant on the outside world and its non-scientific institutions, which make its discoveries possible by providing scientists with the potential and opportunities they need. Newton's contributions to the development of understanding of gravity are seemingly abstract, but benefited from a vast network of sources only made available through imperial expansion and colonialism. Scientific discoveries also don't just rely on contributions from related areas of science. During Charles Darwin's HMS Beagle voyage, he observed peculiar differences in organisms living in different regions. Animals, such as birds, seem to possess varying traits, like beak size, that were suited to their environment. In other words, they appear to have adapted to it. This was a notable observation, as Darwin existed during a time of extensive debate over whether species were fixed or could go extinct. There was also debate over inheritance, such as Lamarck's theory, which argued that organisms acquired traits that were passed on to their descendants. Yet, Darwin didn't come up with a theory of evolution until almost 3 decades later. The development of his theory relied not only on observations during his voyage, but through the accumulation of knowledge and observation from numerous other fields. One book that influenced Darwin was Thomas Malthus's Principle of Population, which argued that the human population would eventually exceed food supply, causing the population to be kept in check by factors such as war, famine, and disease. The people who survived, Malthus argued, would be the fittest members of the population. Darwin was also influenced by Charles Lyell's work on geological structures. Lyell argued that through gradualism, geological structures experienced many small changes over time, resulting in significant shifts to their shape over large timescales, which occurred without a particular direction. Darwin was also interested in the practices of animal breeders, who selected for specific traits, forming new breeds after enough generations had been bred. Darwin would eventually publish On the Origin of Species, which developed the theory of evolution through natural selection. Much like Malthus's population principle, only the fittest animals were able to survive through their traits and would pass them on to the next generation. Likewise, these changes were gradual and led to the formation of species only after many generations, much like those experienced by geological structures as explained by Lyell. Darwin's theory of evolution was therefore not only a product of his own observation and ideas aboard the HMS Beagle, but a synthesis of diverse inspirations from different branches of science, even seemingly unrelated ones like geology and demographics, as well as his own environment. By viewing history and science in terms of milestones, we tend to forget the context and history behind discoveries. Copernicus created a new framework that shook the foundations of past understanding which had stood for over a millennium, but not without relying on the diverse contributions of other astronomers from the past. Newton's contributions to the development of understanding of gravity are seemingly abstract, but benefited from a vast network of sources only made available through imperial expansion and colonialism. Darwin's observations on the HMS Beagle voyage largely contributed to his theory of evolution and the origin of species, but only after inspiration from the works of Thomas Malthus, Charles Lyell, and even breeding practices in Britain. According to a quote popularly attributed to Newton himself, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Copernicus, Newton, and Darwin are history's monumental scientific figures. But without the giant network of other scientists, political circumstances, and environmental influences might have never reached the heights of scientific breakthrough humanity remembers them for today.